Coogs house. All right. It wasn't a dream. The football program at Houston is at 500 this early in the season, while the football team has won 3 of the last 4 games. Trust me, it all makes sense.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougs, a podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. And whether you're a Houston fan or just a hater came to stop by, thank you for making Locked On Cougs your first listen of the day. Appreciate making us your first listen each and every day. Enjoy the conversation, but don't say, tell us in the comments down below if you've ever seen a pro football team win a game while throwing 5 interceptions, because I just saw that happen. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. More on that fun later, but to this episode today is going to be talking about the Houston Cougar basketball game over the weekend, kind of a second watch kind of thing, and the big matchup with Auburn. Houston falls 74-69 in that one. I want to break it down. First one, I guess I should mention at the end of the show, we'll talk about stakes. In the second part of the show, I want to talk about rotations. I've seen a lot of people question a Hall of Fame caliber staff on what they're doing with rotations and things like that. But I first want to say first, happy Veterans Day, and thank you to all those who have served. Second, I want to open the show by talking some about what happened on watching it a second time. So Sunday, the luxury of YouTube TV on these bigger games would typically be that you can record things, but ESPN Plus did have it still in the archives to go back and watch a second time through. And I found one sequence that felt like it kind of stole the game for Auburn. And I want to talk through this. You probably remember as I start going, but there's about 6 minutes left in the ball game when this starts happening. So Houston gets up 56-51. Auburn takes the timeout. You just had like a Juwan Roberts jump shot, Manuel Sharp 3. A couple possessions before that, you had Javier Francis made both free throws. Like it felt like things were starting to finally roll Houston's way. Auburn and Bruce Pearl take a timeout and settle the team. And again, Houston's up 5 and would later actually take the lead again. But this is kind of where things start to shift Auburn's way in a big kind of way. Like the very next set at the timeout, you had an offensive rebound by Janai Broome, who kicked it out to Hod Pettiford. The next defensive possession, Janai Broome blocks a Juwan Roberts shot at the rim, and that leads to a transition 3. The next offensive possession Auburn has is when you have that high pick and roll set where the over aggressiveness of Houston kind of doubled Pettiford high, and Broome rolled for an easy dunk down the middle of the lane. Next possession for Auburn is a weaving at the top where you have like handoffs going back and forth and just kind of weaving around the 3-point line, handoff to Pettiford. And then the one after that, you end up getting you have a U4, the under 4 timeout, right? And then the next offensive possession for Auburn is a pick and pop to Janai Broome for a long 2. They ended up getting to 64-60. I didn't talk about every Houston basket mixed in there, but what you see here between the 6:15-ish mark, the timeout gets taken, and you see a series of possessions here from Auburn for until like about the 3:30, 3:15 mark, where you see they've clearly figured out what they want to do, right? They decided fairly strongly, I guess it's actually just under 4 minutes, but they've decided that in this 2-minute window, we're going to ride these 2 guys on offense, play with pace, and just lock up, obviously play defense, got to stop baskets. But their offense is going to be all focused on these 2 guys, going through them, and speed, pace. That's all they're going to do, right? And they had a bunch of different sets to get into to do it for what it's worth. It wasn't like they just ran the same thing over and over again. Houston actually gets the lead at about the 3.5-minute mark. That's when Sharp hits the 3. Milos Uzan looked off. I think it was a lob to Francis, might have been Tugler, and then kicked it on a break to Sharp for a fast break 3. And that happens about 2:15. Anyway, you end up seeing this like back and forth suddenly happen, and eventually Auburn finds their focus, pulls away, and I feel like that full series there is where Auburn steals the game, because at 56-51, I don't necessarily put a whole lot of stock into those like shot charts or the not the shot charts, but the percentage to win or whatever. But ESPN Stats and Info has Houston at a 78% chance to win the basketball game at that point, meaning in 78% of occurrences, the team up by 5 or more with 6:02 left has won the game, right? Like it's just typically how that happens. And then it just starts shifting very dramatically over the course of the game. Now, that was not the biggest lead Houston ever had. It was not frankly, the best Houston had played in that game or anything like that. But like 6-minute mark, it felt like, okay, even after everything that's happened, you've just got the Joanne Roberts jumper. You've just got the sharp three. Francis is going to make his free throws. Like, this is going to be a tough, gritty one, but things are going to go Houston's way. And props to Bruce Pearl for calling timeout and getting his guys focused. Houston's timeout situation was a little bit different at that point in the ball game, and Kelvin saved one until later. And admittedly, when he used it later, it was a time where Houston was down and still within reach. It was just a possession at that point. And it was, I'm sure, talking about where to get the steals, where to get the traps, and those kinds of things. I don't mean to say that they misused their timeouts in that sense. It's more about like, that's a really darn good basketball team. That sequence that immediately followed the timeout is when you see that coaching as a part of it, right? Now, I hesitate to go too in depth about like praising them and patting them on the back and whatever, because ultimately, like, we know they're a good basketball team, right? They're number one in Ken Palm now after that win. They'll be in the top 5, I imagine, in the AP poll. The win over the number 4 team in America. Hard to think of a better win thus far. In college basketball, someone responded to me on Twitter saying they think that Gonzaga's win over Baylor was stronger. Aside from the fact they think the person was a little biased, I also would stress that, Gonzaga, even though Baylor is a high-ranked team, Houston was ranked higher than Baylor, and Gonzaga was supposed to win that game, and they were never an underdog or anything like that, right? I think that on the whole, Auburn's stretch there in the final few minutes was just something Houston didn't have time to react to. If you had another 10 minutes in this game, right, that was a 16-minute mark and not the 6-minute mark. There's no reason Houston doesn't dig that out, right? That's just kind of the ebbs and flows of the game. But that ultimate 2-minute stretch kind of sealed it. Now, there were moments where I felt like things were all going to go all Auburn's way. The couple of banked threes in the first half, whatever. I felt like there were moments where things felt like things were going to go all Houston's way. The end of half 3-pointer from Terrence, the couple missed dunks that would have been easy 4 points for Auburn, right? Those kinds of things. And so I guess that's, the natural way these things go. But that's 6 minutes to about 3.5 minute stretch. So I guess what the total of 3 game minutes, that felt really important. And the intention, when you watch it a second time, knowing what the result is very, very clear. They come out of that timeout. It's no longer it's about like Denver Jones or Chaney Johnson or the other Auburn Tigers are not really nearly as big a factor. There's 1 or 2 shots made. I was going to say that don't do anything, but the focus from Auburn, those final 6 minutes, is their 2 dudes, one of which is a freshman guard who's really stinking good. And honestly, a freshman guard is really stinking good, and kind of, as a really good freshman, prompted a lot of fan chatter all weekend long after this one about who should and shouldn't play and who is going to get in and who's going to get what rotation, who's going to get yada, yada, yada. And I want to get into the yada, yada, yada. But first, before we get too far, I do want to remind you that today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. They're doing all kinds of great deals right now. If you bet $5 and it hits, you get $150 back in bonus bets. I don't know why you'd be looking anywhere else. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on NFL or anything else you got to get action in on. If you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, you live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Right now, as they're recording this podcast, Houston opens as a 2.5-point underdog on the road at Arizona in football next weekend. I can't believe they don't have Houston winning. Houston went through the last 4. Arizona's not any good this year. I get that it's in Arizona and all that, but the train is moving. The train is moving. Now, the over-under set at 43.5. that feels a little more tough because Houston likes these games in the teens. But whatever you think about those lines or anything like that, you can make sure you check them out and get in on the action at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment worth. FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Parker Answer, Locked on Cougs here, talking about Houston dropping one to Auburn over the weekend in men's basketball. And a big part of the conversation after this game was honestly talking about rotations. Houston technically did play 9 guys in this basketball game. I say technically because Ramon Walker played just 1 minute. Javier Francis played 9 minutes officially, and Terrence Arsenault played 12 minutes. That's a lot of minutes distributed amongst just a handful of other guys. And I think people were interested in the fact that Auburn was carried by a freshman point guard, Todd Pettiford, a McDonald's All-American last year from New Jersey, came in and really stole the show in the second half. And I want to say 2 things. One, the natural connection people were making was that as a scorer, Mercy Miller could have made a difference. And I will say, not to give too much credit because I'm about to say you're wrong, but a lot of people are accurately pointing out that Mercy would have had 6 or more points had he played just a few minutes in this game. Mercy is a very good scorer. Mercy is an elite scorer for a freshman and is a Big 12 rotational caliber kind of player at the very least as an offensive scorer. Those are all true. He can light it up. He can score from all 3 levels. He can get to the rim. He's strong. All true. He's going to be really good, guys. But he didn't play this game because, frankly, A, he's a freshman, the second game of his collegiate career. B, this is a team that, for 11th in the AP poll is one thing, but they're number 2 in KenPom going in, number 1 in KenPom coming out, a top caliber team in America. And honestly, defensively he's still growing. He had moments in the Jackson State game where he got a little bit lost here, a little bit lost there. Jackson State wasn't able to make Houston punished for it. It didn't matter. But those are the growing pains of a freshman defender in a complex system, right? A lot of we switch on this, we don't switch on that. We switch here, we don't switch there. Those kinds of things you got to figure out. When you bear, when you monster, when you don't, right? Those kind of things you got to figure out. And ultimately, the complexity of the defense, I think, and the intensity combined, because to play that intense, you cannot be thinking simultaneously, right? That all added up, right, to a fairly challenging moment, I would say, I think it makes a challenging thing for any freshman. Okay, that's all I'll say on that. I would also say that the game never felt wide enough spread to feel like, yeah, let's see what the freshman can do. And part of that is on the guys in the game need to make their shots. LJ Cryer needs to not get in foul trouble, etc. Right? But people point out, well, Auburn played their freshman guard, and look how it went for them. And I hate that argument for a lot of reasons. But one, I'll say quite blankly that part of the reason Mercy came to Houston is to be developed. The Houston program develops guards. It really develops all basketball players at an incredible clip. I mean, Marcus Sasser goes from 399th ranked guy in his class to a top 25 pick, right? Jamal Shedd goes from like a 2-star recruit to a Toronto Raptor, leading the all rookies in assists this year, right? Grimes, people have given up on him. Look at him now. Ladiki Giroux, like all these guys, right? Galen Robinson, right? Development staff in Houston, big time. Rob Gray, names that keep going in my head right now. But development does not happen before the second game of your freshman year. Mercy is going to be very good. I would be willing to put money on the guy's a pro. He can score already. Defense matters. It matters a lot to this staff. Further, the Todd Pettiford thing, he's a rotational guy. He didn't make a shot in their first game, right? He frankly was playing his normal minutes. He's a McDonald's All-American coming in. He means he was pretty far along in his development as a point guard coming in, right? For what it's worth, Pettiford got 15 of his 21 points in this game in the final 12 minutes, meaning that I don't know that it's necessarily a given that had he not been so electric, red hot that he gets left in the game in that situation for them either. He'd gone over in his first game. He had just 6 points going into the 12-minute mark. He got hot. And, I don't think it would have been that crazy for Bruce Pearl to have subbed a guy out that had just 6 or 7 points and put in a more veteran guard. He was just hot, and they rode it, right? Like that's what happens. If Houston's roster looked a little bit different, we might be rotating in guys a little bit differently. But right now, you got pretty veteran guards of your own. Milos is, his plus minus was the best on the team. He was at plus 14. You don't want to take him out if you don't have to. LJ is contention for Big 12 Player of the Year, was first team All Big 12. Jawan Roberts is in contention for being the best power forward in all of America. He's an All Big 12 guy last year himself. The other guard, I'm saying that because he'll be the power forward, so you don't really want to take him out and go for 4 guards a whole lot. Emmanuel Sharp at the other guard is, probably the best sharpshooter on the team, no pun intended, but he's definitely he's a third-year player, started every game last year, was the 6th man, the first guard off the bench his freshman year. All of that experience matters too. And, they coach this game, both coaches coach this game more like it was March than it was November. And so that means that you're trying to see what you got to make an evaluation and assessment to then kind of steer your team the rest of the way. Both coaches know their teams are good. I think that's pretty solid. But where the holes are, where your 8-man rotation lies. Truthfully, in a 40-minute basketball game, you watch an NBA game goes 48 minutes. 8 men is kind of where the rotation cuts. And I know Ramon Walker played 1 minute, and so it ends up being a technically 9-man rotation. But to get, everyone decent usage, to get the best guys on the floor playing together, and to get those kind of things, like 8 men is if you can really go a true 8 deep, that's really good. The benefit of this team is that they've got a lot of guys that can fit into that. The challenge of this team is going to be that they've got a lot of guys that can fit into that. And how do you figure out which one goes where? I said on the show post game that my question wasn't about the guards as much as it was about the big men. Francis played just 9 minutes. If he wasn't good to go like you thought he was with that 9 minutes, I thought maybe that was a lingering injury from before. Why not play Said Lot more? He's a big body, big bruiser. Auburn pretty much always had 2 true bigs on the floor. Janai Broom can spread it out a little bit, but 2 guys that were 6'10" or taller on the floor. So use Said Lot some. And ultimately, while I still feel like Lot could have played some, it sounds like Francis actually re-aggravated the injury at some point. It wasn't about the lingeringness. It wasn't that he was on the 10-minute restriction or anything like that. And so we'll see how he comes out on Wednesday. These groins can be tricky. They play Louisiana on Wednesday. But I almost feel like because of his injury that's probably more the spot that I would look at rotationally. Tugler played 31 minutes. Jawan Robert played 38 minutes. Do you need to look at, getting a lot in the game some? Because while I probably would have done it in the early part of the second half, you want fresher legs in there on Janai Broom at the end when he's kind of the go-to guy, right? Those are my thoughts on the rotation. But even then, had Francis been healthy, apparently like he was to start the game, then I imagine he plays more than the 9 minutes, and that's your rotation, right? And so I think that was part of the qualms, right, with fixing that and mixing that up. I know there are complaints. There are going to be complaints after every loss. I will say one of the things that had me the most live over the weekend was you lost by 5 points in a neutral site to a team that could very well make it to San Antonio for the Final Four this year. It's November. I guess the game was played on the 9th, and people were acting like this was the end of the world, that coaching staff's past prime, and that, like, how could they not put more? How could they not do this? How could they not and, like, there's a plan. They're going to get better every day. We've seen this happen over and over and over and over again. Sampson's teams get better every day. It's not an accident that they got better after 2 conference losses in their first 2 conference road games last year against TCU and Iowa State. Those things helped this program. They helped that team. This year, it's Auburn. This loss will help this program and will help this team. We've seen it happen every year. And the questioning of the system and the questioning of the this and that, like, just drove me a little bananas. And I also was probably on my Twitter phone too late in the night on Saturday because of it. But message boards can be bad for your health, guys. Stay off those. We're going to talk about more about the stakes of this game, what this means going forward in just a second. But I want to remind you today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. What time is it? It's game time. Time to get in the games, the best app for getting tickets, last minute deals, zone deals, flash deals. You can see what it's going to look like for that concert, comedy show, theater event, sports game, whatever, from your seat in that section, in that row. You can see exactly what you're going to see from that area, all on the app. And right now, you can get into the Baylor game. Houston hosts Baylor in football in just about 2 weeks. They're wearing their blues in that game, and so on. Game Time has get-in price for that, all in, no fees hidden or anything like that. All in pricing at $27 a ticket to get in to that game. You get a lower bowl, all fees included, for $36. Why aren't you going to the game? Right? Like, why? Get to the game, use it, get on Game Time to get to that game. Use the Game Time picks app to find the best value seat you can. Download the Game Time app and create an account and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. By the way, $20 off of a $36 lower bowl ticket is $16. Just saying. Terms apply. Again, code LOCKEDONCollege. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Welcome back to Locked On Cougs. Here breaking down Houston falling to Auburn 74-69. Now, tough game. Still were some good showings. I think JoJo Tugler was particularly impressive on the defensive end. Really flying around, couple steals, couple blocks. Ended up with 7 rebounds. Really impressive. Guys just always a pogo stick. The length clearly altered a lot of what Auburn wanted to do in the first half of the game, because it's the kind of length you can't prepare for. You can read about and understand, but until you see JoJo Tugler on the floor, it's a little bit different, right? I want to talk some about Milos Uzan too, who, again, at plus 14 and a 5-point loss is a really impressive outing. Got to stay out of foul trouble. He did foul out. That's ultimately, kind of hurt Houston, to say the least, there at the end. But I mentioned that there are people acting like the sky is falling on social media, and if you're not on social media, don't. But people acting like the sky is falling Saturday night in my comment section on the Twitter spheres. Again, the message boards can be bad for your health sometimes. But aside from telling you the sky is not falling because of this basketball game, first, I would point out that, at the end of the day, this game was technically a neutral site game in terms of what quad you're playing and what this and what that. Auburn's going to do very well this year. They have for my money, the most difficult schedule in college basketball. They play Duke, they play Purdue, they play in the Maui Invitational, and they very easily could match up with UConn. SEC after that, and while I can make jokes about who's good and who's not in that conference, it is it's at least with the third or fourth best conference in college basketball. Some people would put it second for the Big East. I think that's the debate probably. It's a tough schedule. It's a tough schedule. They're going to be a really highly ranked team throughout the year. Again, they'll probably be in the top 5 when the AP poll comes out later today, right? And as far as what that does for Houston and seeding and March and so on, you played them tight, less than 6 points. It's 3 possessions, and I guess really technically 2 would have tied it, right? 3 the first shot, 2 the second shot, right? And it was technically a neutral site. And I get on my soapbox, talk about how Toyota Center should never feel like a neutral site, and there were a lot of Auburn people there and did feel like a neutral site or whatever. I think really that's kind of besides the point. This will be a long-lasting result in a positive way for this program, because every time Auburn does well, and Houston had him on the ropes there for a second, and Houston had him, played him to the wire, and Houston, I think Houston being their good win will be a good thing. And I think also that like Houston played them that tightly is going to be a good thing. In those kind of conversational sides of who gets ranked where, who gets placed where, etc. The quads thing, I think again, Auburn's going to analytically do pretty well. As far as like the more social emotional side of like this loss and like, oh no, oh no, oh no, woe was us or whatever. Spoiler alert, I think Houston wins against Louisiana Lafayette on Wednesday. I think they beat Hofstra the week after that. Then they'll head on to Vegas for the NIL Players Invitational. They'll play other tough teams there. Alabama is really good. Really, Mark Sears, their guard, is really good. But they'll be better in that one than they were in this one. They'll be better because they played this one, right? Those moments where you can kind of figure out what a team's going to, and those clutch moments like the Janai Broome, Todd Pettiford combination that I talked about in the opening segment, right? Those will have a different vibe to them the second time you're in one of those games. They just will. And I think that it's interesting and important to remember that, like, while Auburn, Alabama, the fun connection because of their own rivalry, like these games will be connected. How Houston prepares for Alabama will be because of this Auburn game, right? College basketball's been around for over 100 years. Modern basketball, I guess you could talk about being around for 70 years. The game got integrated, I guess, technically, formally in the 60s. The game has been around a long time. College basketball has been around a long time. The tournament's been, 68 teams for a while, but 64 plus teams for 40 years or whatever. It's not quite that long, but you got me right. When you look at games, teams just don't go undefeated. Kentucky was close, but didn't. You had the Indiana team of 50 years ago, and I'm sure I'm going to have someone comment on that. That's a lot of basketball being played over the course of college basketball, of this game, to only have one team do it. And that was a very different era of people doing it in the first place, right? Teams aren't going to go undefeated. We want them to schedule these games. We want them to schedule these good games. And frankly, sometimes you lose those games. And they lost to Alabama back in 22-23. And I'd argue that loss was worse for Houston. It was in Fertitta. That was part of it. And Houston was in the American. They needed the non-conference win because the conference wasn't going to have a whole lot of good opponents. Houston still ended up being number one seed that year, and had they not been injured, I think does pretty well in the tournament. And that was the year actually the Final Four had been in Houston, so had they gotten there, right, that could have been a whole different deal. I think that was that year. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But this year's loss hurts over the weekend. 24-hour rule. I try to differentiate when I'm speaking as a podcaster or as a fan, or I also coach high school basketball or as a former player or whatever, right? All those kinds of things. But I think the one thing that kind of all those can have in common is let a loss hurt for 24 hours. Let it hurt for 18 to 24 hours, and then move on. Right? That's as much as it can be. College basketball moves very fast, and there's a lot of stuff happening now here at Locked On Cougs. We've got more on football happening in just a second. Short little bonus. We've got book clubs. We've got recruit news all week. All kinds of stuff happening here at Locked On Cougs. Make sure you subscribe. Hit the bell so you know we're live. For the very second listen of the day that's about more than just the Cougs, I'm going to recommend Locked On College Basketball for what they're doing over there, talking about all things from the weekend. Locked On Cougs, primarily the Locked On podcast. And now we're going to be your team every day. Go Cougs.